in Physiological Psychology, now known as Neuroscience, at Yale University. At NYU School of Medicine, he conducted neuropsycho-pharmacological research on brain stress systems involved in depressive illness for over 40 years and has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals. Eric came out as an atheist about 15 years ago and has been active in the movement ever since then. He helped from Westchester Atheists in New York, and when they moved to California in 2013, Eric and his wife, Elaine, became co-leaders of the Rossmore Group. Eric is with us this evening to speak on why religion is incompatible with science. Please join me in welcoming Eric Stone.
I'll use the microphone. It's okay. I just want to make sure I know how to use this stuff here. This goes down. This one, okay. That one goes up. This one goes. Wait a second. Okay. I think I'm going the right way. No, I'm not going the right way. Okay. Every time you use a new computer, it's like learning a new language. I think that'll work. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let me just see. Yes, okay. First of all, I got to tell you, it's a real pleasure to be here. You guys have a fantastic reputation. I've heard a tremendous amount about your group, and it's really an honor to I hope I can give you something to help your battle with religion. Okay, why is religion incompatible with science? Well, why do I talk about this? You know, most religious people are under sort of the delusion that religion is compatible with science, except for things like evolution and so on. They think it really agrees, but in reality, they hold a lot of very anti-science ideas, and many of these are downright dangerous. So, like faith over evidence, for example, more value over faith and evidence, the efficacy of prayer, faith healing of sick children, and God gave us our rights and our freedoms. I mean, these are harmful to us and our society, and they're maintained by a whole bunch of fallacious arguments, which maintain their position of privilege and maintain our second-class citizenship as seculars. And I think it's the role of all of us free thinkers to educate the public as to the fallacies that they use. And that's what my talk is going to be about. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how religion conflicts with the scientific method. And that's going to be sort of a mixture of the debunkings you've probably already heard, along with some new ideas that I've had and that I've heard my atheist friends and colleagues come up with recently. So first of all, before getting into that, I have to say that religion explicitly rejects the aspects of the scientific method, many of them. So right off the bat, I think we should just list what they are. It rejects objectivity. They know it's right because they feel it, and they know it's true because they feel it. It's impossible to verify that. They reject or they revise empirical facts and derivations. They condone lying to save the faith, where fossils are found, the age of the earth, and so on. They invert the cause and effect frequently, so they'll put the conclusion before the evidence, which is essentially prejudicial thinking. And they do this with the anthropic principle. I'm going to go into that later. And they use many logical fallacies, the most common of which is circular arguments, and it's part of a willful rejection of logic. They also violate the assumptions of the controlled experiment. They insist on the existence of the supernatural. And they violate the principle of parsimony, which allows them to avoid being proven wrong. So if they are explicitly rejecting the scientific method, I mean, the whole question of trying to reconcile religion with science becomes kind of silly. But I think we should look into, each of the things that I've mentioned a little more in depth before we make that conclusion. So what are the major contradictions? I'm going to go through these kind of fast because I have a lot of ground to cover, and you guys know what most of the contradictions are already, so I'm really preaching to the choir here, but just to review it quickly. First of all, objectivity. Okay, so science deals only with objective facts. It's objective. It deals only with indisputable facts, like there is a book on the table over there. These facts can be verified by virtually every healthy, neutral, mature human on the planet. They are indisputable, incontrovertible. And they also involve, science also studies sensations, moods, and feelings. Well, how does it do this? It does this by making sure that these are objective measures. So they're usually verbal reports. Science also deals with things that cannot be seen directly, like love, like the mind. These are things that the religious like to point out to us all the time that we can't possibly measure. But we do this by seeing how they affect other real things. This is exactly the same way that physicists and biologists studied things like the electron or the gene before we had ways of detecting them directly. We did it from heat and light, and we did it from the color of leaves. Religion, on the other hand, deals only with non-objective data. This cannot be verified by anyone other than the person who's reporting it. Subjective feelings, anecdotes, apparitions, miracles, and so on. Testimony of loyal followers who will lie to support the faith, and experiences of long-dead supporters. The second contradiction has to do with the regularity of nature. Nature is regular. It's not the result of an arbitrary supernatural ruler, not a random the same conditions lead to the same consequences. This is the basis of all replication and prediction. Defined objects have stable properties and obey stable laws, like the fixed boiling and freezing points of liquids, the stable orbits of planets and comets. We can predict when a comet is coming back 70 years in advance. When that first happened, of course, nothing like that ever happens in religion. And when that happened, you can imagine how the people felt, religious people felt. They felt that we were the next gods. In religion, supernatural is real and it's above all. Okay, God makes everything work, therefore prayer and faith work much better than science on real things, according to them. And that predicts a world filled with miracles in which the laws of nature are being broken by God all the time as he intervenes in our lives. But of course, not a single miracle has ever been verified by objective means. The third through the fifth requirement are the requirements of theories. Scientific theories are logical, capable of being tested, and falsified with controlled experiments and precise observations. And this is, of course, the most important difference between science and religion. So I'm going to go into these three: the logical requirement, testable predictions, and the controlled experiment. Logical requirement. Reality, for some reason or other, works, macro reality, I'm not talking about quantum mechanics here, works in a logical, rational way. And that's the reason that science does. And that's the reason that science works when it's rational. Religion rejects logic. It's filled with a whole lot of illogical ideas, the most common of which is circular reasoning. And I'm going to go into that a bit because I think we should know what the main examples of circularity in religion are during our arguments and debates with them. So circular reasoning is the fallacy of using the definition of something to prove something about its reality. The most common example of this is you can define a unicorn as a horse that has a horn between its eyes, but that, of course, does not prove that they exist. You need to have empirical evidence for that, and none has yet been found. So some of the famous circular statements that you see in religion, and ones that we let them get away with, are, God is able to violate the laws of physics because he's God and God can do anything. You ever heard that one? Wait. Real Christians couldn't have perpetrated Inquisition tortures because real Christians can't do bad things. Again, that's a circular statement. The Bible is the Word of God. So the Bible is the Word of God because God tells us it is in the Bible. So they do this, and it's filled. Religion is really filled with circular. Sometimes they slip them into other arguments where they're difficult to spot. I think I spotted one in the ontological argument. This is the one that argues from the Big Bang and creation that God must exist. So they say in that argument, God has always existed and needs no creator to create him. Therefore, he was the beginning and the first cause. But that seems to me to be a circular argument from the definition of God, which is slipped into an astrophysical argument, the Big Bang, and it's difficult to notice in there. So they sort of get away with that. Okay, testable predictions and falsifiability requirement. This, of course, another key difference between science and theology. Only genuine scientific theories make explicit predictions which can be tested and proven wrong. Theologians almost never make predictions from their tenets, and when they do, they're invariably wrong. Like that happened this year with the, you remember, with the end of days. And no biblical prophecy has ever proven correct. Victor Stenger, the late Victor Stenger, who died this last year, I think, extensively studied all of the biblical prophecies and proved that none of them ever was substantiated. They do make lots of postdictions, however, not predictions, but postdictions. They look like predictions, except they're made after the fact, and they're always 100% correct. Some of the famous ones are, we have achieved so much because we followed God's commandments. Well, the achievement occurred before they came up with this argument, right? So they had to be right. The disaster occurred because we kicked God out of our schools. Of course, the disaster hit first, and they thought up the cause and effect. The earthquake was the result of women exposing too much breast. Of course, the earthquake came first. Right. Right. Negative evidence. Not too many women tonight. That's strange. Okay, negative evidence. This is another thing. Now, of course, religion makes the famous argument that, you cannot prove the non-existence of God because you can't find him anyway because he could be lurking somewhere you haven't looked. You can never prove a negative. But that is wrong. It confuses probability with possibility. All of the professions that use evidence, the professions that use evidence, science and medicine, police work, law, they all use the probability levels and level of confidence. They don't use possibility. Possibility is just a term that really has more to do with mathematics than it does with science. So negative evidence is critical in these. Science uses negative evidence to disprove theories all the time. When your results don't come out right, your theory is wrong, and it's rejected. Medicine disproves diseases that way. Police work disproves crime. So God's existence, seems to me, should be based on a similar confidence technique. He is defined as existing everywhere and anywhere. He should be found somewhere, but never once in the millions or quadrillions of places that he should have been. And this is the reason that we reject the existence of unicorns and most other unexperienced entities, and so we should apply the same to God. That's wishful thinking. Violation of the controlled experiment. This is another one. Now, this is sort of a new one that no one really thought of except the two authors a while ago whose name I forget at the moment. But they came up with a very clear contradiction between religion and science concerning the controlled experiment. And of course, the controlled experiment is the basis of all modern science. And I'm sure you all know how a controlled experiment works with two different groups, an experimental and a control. And that's the only thing that can differ in. You look at another variable. If it differs, it had to be due to the difference in the experimental variable. Everybody pretty much knows what a controlled experiment is. But if something or someone could affect our variables that we had no control over, or any ability to measure or detect, that would undermine the entire idea of control. We would never be able to trust any of the results of controlled experiments. So that's a very basic contradiction between science and religion. And I would like to ask some of the famous religious people who are scientists, like the current head of NIH, Collins, whether he believes that God ever affected his controlled experiment. So yeah, okay, that's the controlled experiment. Violation of parsimony, Occam's razor. This is another very important principle of science that religion totally rejects. The principle states the hypothesis with the fewest assumptions is the most likely to be correct. The reason that is because the more and more assumptions you add, the easier and easier it is for people to wiggle out of negative data. Theories essentially become useless when you add all these assumptions. I'll give you an example of this. For example, if you let astronomers make as many assumptions about orbits as they want to, any number, they could actually prove that the sun revolves around the Earth rather than the Earth around the sun, which of course we know is correct because they have all of the degrees of freedom to do that. And every time science discovers a new finding that contradicts scriptures, the religious invent some new excuse, which is an ad hoc assumption that allows them to evade being proven wrong. So, for example, when science discovered the germs and that germs caused infectious disease, that contradicted the view of the Bible and of Jesus that bad spirits caused illness. So what did they do? They came up with a little cute one. I've heard people say this, I haven't yet found it written anywhere. Jesus always knew about germs, but chose not to confuse his followers with things they wouldn't be able to understand. Okay. Or what they can do is they can string together several far-fetched excuses to make what I call an ultra-far-fetched one. As this is an explanation for why God doesn't just kill the devil. It's like, why doesn't God just kill the devil and end evil? Well, he doesn't kill the devil, even though he can, because he wants us to choose him instead. Okay, so let's look at that statement. It actually has 5 assumptions. 1, there is a God. 2, there is a devil. 3, God can kill the devil if he wanted to. 4, he chooses not to. 5, because he wants us to choose him over the devil. 5 assumptions in this one little sentence. Now, if you just follow this for a second, if each individual assumption had a 20% chance, which is very generous, I would say, of being true, then the probability of that whole combination of 5 would equal 0.2 times 0.2, so you have to multiply all the probabilities, and you get 0.0032, less than 1 chance in 1,000 of the set of 5 being correct. And that is what allows religious leaders to pull the wool over the eyes of their followers who know very little about probabilities, how to calculate them, or if they do, they're probably too afraid to. I have a couple of cute examples of this, but this one is the best. This is from religious right Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. This is his comment about the devil in a New York Magazine interview in 2012. In the gospel, the devil is doing all sorts of things. He's making pigs run off cliffs. He's possessing people and whatnot. And that doesn't happen very much anymore. It's because he's smart. He's much more successful that way. The devil is doing all sorts of things. What he's doing now is getting people not to believe in him or in God. Okay, so let's look at that one. I counted. Right, okay. 13 assumptions he made in that little thing. So I don't going to go all of them. There is a God, the Gospels about this God are true, there's a devil, so on and so on. And you can do this. So 13 assumptions to get to a vilification of atheists, which is what he really wants to do, because he loves to stick it to the atheists. So I've been accumulating their excuses, and I have about 45 of them now. So I said if each had a chance of 20%, which is very generous, of being correct, then the chance of all 42 being correct would be this astronomically low number of 3.4 times 10 to the minus 25th. Next on the topics, contradiction is inversion of the cause and effect. What they are doing here is putting a very likely effect of something before its very likely cause, and then claiming that this is evidence of intelligent design. And this is, I believe, the fallacy involved in the anthropic principle, which is currently being touted by religion as their great new proof for the existence of God and the intelligent creator. Okay, so let's look at this. Anthropic principle states the various physical constants of the universe have been tuned by an intelligent designer to support the existence of the universe and life. That's sort of the generic anthropic principle. There are different kinds of it, but that's the generic one. The reasoning is if the physical constants were slightly different, that is the speed of light, charge on an electron, Planck's constant, there would be no atoms, no universe, and no life. Therefore, some intelligent force that wanted life must have tuned them so that a universe would form and support its existence. And the fallacy here is backwards thinking, unlikely thinking, putting a likely effect, which is the existence of life, before its likely cause, and before the likely cause, yeah, and possibly also the implication that all the physical constants are independent of each other and can be changed individually. Okay, so here is the scientific view of life in our universe. So the universe was originated first, and various physical constants were originated as well, and this occurred, we assume, by natural processes. We don't know what they are, but this is our assumption now. About 13 billion years ago. Life originated, at least on one planet, by entirely natural processes about 3.5 billion to 2.7 billion years ago, and slowly spread to all the available niches in it, okay? So that's the standard scientific view of the origin of life, of use of the universe and life. And this is the anthropic review. Some intelligent force, independent of matter and energy, that wanted the present 8.7 million species of life to exist, tuned all the physical constants to allow matter and energy and all forms of life to come into existence. They did this before the universe began. Once the universe was formed, this force then created the original life forms and either let them evolve by natural selection or intervened in their survival by saving ancestral species from extinction. Okay, so that's the anthropic view. So when I present it like that, you begin to see how many assumptions it has. The scientific view seems to me to only have one assumption. The universe and life arose through natural processes. The anthropic principle, on the other hand, says there was an intelligent force. Essentially, there was God. Independent of all matter and energy, it existed billions of years ago and wanted to create all life forms we now have. It had the power to change each of the physical constants to any value it desired. It also had the intelligence and foresight to know which values would support each of the present 8.7 million species, and it had the power to create life and protect all ancestral species that would evolve into our current species from extinction. And it also implied that all the physical constants of the universe are independent of each other so that they can be changed individually without altering the whole set. Those are a lot of assumptions. And that I think is the evidence against the anthropic principle. It shows that it's a very unlikely principle, okay? So, it's backwards thinking because it starts rather than ends up with all 8.7 million current species, at least the design of it, which is so unlikely to be absurd. Well, how can we account for the apparent match between all of the constants and the present world and life? And I think there's a very easy way to show how we can account for it. It's to simply watch a hole fill up with water. That's all you have to do. The reason is that you see a hole in the ground, and you see it rain, and you notice that the water fills the hole exactly, okay? That's no problem for us because we all know about rainwater. We know about water being a fluid. We know that the water has low surface tension, so it's going to go into all the cracks and crevices of a hole. But what if you didn't know that? What if you didn't know that liquids do have that properties? Then you'd have to be able to try to explain how come the water fills up the hole exactly and matches every crevice and crack perfectly. And I could give you probabilities for that. You could make the gradations as fine as you want. You could get astronomically low probabilities that could happen by chance. But we see it happen every day because we know because we know it's a lawful relationship. So I think that's how we account for the match between life forms and the so-called match that they claim exists. Okay, so let me move on to progress, unity of knowledge, and reductionism. This is one of my pet peeves also. Progress only occurs in science. There is no progress in religion. All religion cares about is conquering and victory and extending itself. Science is different. We want knowledge and understanding. We want life made better, and we want those to increase and accelerate with time. And also, knowledge is becoming more unified. This is known as consilience, and I think it's one of the great beauties of science. All the fields of knowledge now are believed to be related. You can go from one to the other, not perfectly easily, but you can get from one to the other. This is now disparagingly referred to as reductionism. But reductionism is really one of the greatest accomplishments of all science. It's called consilience by Edward O. Wilson, who I think is a very intelligent guy. And as you can see, you can go here from biology to chemistry, down to chemistry and down to physics. Again, I say this is science's greatest contribution to civilization, and we should be proud of it, not worried about the way they call it, reductionism. They frequently tell us about emergent phenomenon. Oh, well, these are things that you cannot possibly predict from your principles. You can't predict life from simple physics and chemistry. You can't predict the experience of blueness from the short wavelength of visible light. Well, we probably can predict the occurrence of life. I've seen some new theories about how life might be related to the way energy dissipates, goes from high to low. But blueness, yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, there are things that we can't do yet, and that's one of them. But the more you study these emergent phenomena, the less emergent they become. And it's almost like bugs in a computer program. We can make computer programs, and we can design them from scratch. And we understand everything about that computer program, but there are bugs in it, and we don't see them. but when we sell the product, we find out about them. And it's almost like that, you know. These emergent phenomena are bugs in our understanding of natural laws. Laws of nature are not legal. I'm just going to skip that. Values. Values were the traditional line dividing science and religion. This is not true anymore. Sam Harris. Has anyone read The Moral Landscape here? Couple? That is probably, yeah, that's probably one of the most important books of the century, I would say. I mean, that's quite a claim to make. But it's a hard book to read, but it's definitely worth it because Harris makes the point that science can study values and can comment on morality. He says, and he really is very convincing about this, that values and morality have to do with the well-being of conscious creatures, and that science can determine the best way to achieve that well-being. So if you haven't seen that, if you're not familiar with that book, I really recommend it strongly. So values and morals are now amenable to scientific study. They no longer separate science from non-science. Mental phenomena. I'm going to probably end with this one, but this is the last refuge of the religious against science is in mental phenomenon and consciousness. Yeah, but science can't study love. You ever hear that one? Or you can't study the mind. Or you can't, you know, what is my life story? Aren't these immaterials? And so the most important things in life are beyond the reach of science, they say. But it doesn't hold up, as usual. They forget that mental phenomena were disproven as spiritual or immaterial in the 19th century by the science of neurophysiology and psychophysics. And I like to remind them of this. Neurophysiology in the 19th century showed conclusively you cannot have a mind or consciousness without a functioning brain. It just doesn't exist. If they say one is floating around, you can say, well, what is its memory? You know, what is it saying? I'm sorry. The little souls in the petri dishes, are they thinking and feeling? I don't think so. Okay. Psychophysics showed us that sensations are determined by the physical parameters of the stimuli and are lawfully related to them. Psychophysics is the study of sensation as referred as in terms of the physical properties of the stimulus that is impinging on the person. So, in other words, you sit a subject down and you present some sort of a stimulus, a light or a sound, and you make it vary it in intensity, and you ask the person, how loud does that sound? And you plot the relationship. Every time you do this, you come up with a mathematical relationship between sensation, loudness, and the amount of decibels and the amount of energy you put in. It's a strictly lawful scientific relationship. There's nothing magic about it. So, for example, we all know this. I mean, I don't have to remind you of this, but apparently you do have to remind people of this. Perceived loudness is a function of the number of decibels. Perceived pitch is a function of the frequency of sound wave. Perceived pressure on our skin is a function of the force divided by the area applied to the skin. Perceived color is a function of the light wavelength. Even our emotions are strict responses to specific thoughts. That is the basis of all cognitive therapy. So an essential part of the subjective experience can be related lawfully to the physical dimensions of the stimuli. And that makes it very unlikely that consciousness has anything to do with spirituality or magic. Common sense in Gestalt psychology, for example, showed us that when we see three angles connected by three straight lines, we perceive a triangle. Whoops. We can even use our minds to make logical derivation decisions, just like to compute, just like a material computer. So again, it's very unlikely that we're talking here about. So consciousness and sensation seem to obey the same kinds of lawful relations with other real things as do all other kinds of scientific phenomena. Although we can't derive consciousness. It's very unlikely that it's going to be magic or a spiritual essence. It has lawful, regular relationships, and that is not what you would expect from magic or spirits. In essence, then, so in conclusion, religion represents such an archaic mode of thinking that if any of it were true, science simply would not work. So attempting to reconcile religion with science is like trying to reconcile the stork theory of birth with modern molecular biology of reproduction. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Stone. We're going to open it up now for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, raise your hand and I'll come around.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask about two things. First, the irrational part of science. For example, Kekulé, the discoverer of benzene, says that he didn't know about the structure until he, in a dream, came over with a snake doing the cycle, and then it was inspiration. And second, I would think that religion or magical thought is just another bias in science. It is not the only one. For example, 50 years ago, it was known in science community that women cannot do science. I wanted to ask about the rational part of science, and also people has managed to reconcile. For example, Lemaitre, who was a Catholic priest who came up with the Big Bang, and he realized that that was not proof for God, but he was a scientist, not a priest in that moment. So how do you think about it?
About the rational, getting your ideas from an irrational moment, that's fine because you got to test them rationally. There's no way you can test it irrationally. So the proof of it is rational. The other point was, let me see, I forgot what you said. Oh, well, scientists have biases. Science is better than scientists. I mean, scientists are human, and we all are, subjected to our motivations, and we do some stupid things. But fortunately, there are other scientists that are just waiting to criticize us because they want our positions, and they want our grants, and they will criticize. I mean, if you've ever been to a scientific meeting and listen to scientists go at each other, that's how you finally get to sort of the truth. Yeah. Anything else? What? That what? Religious people that make signs like the Big Bang. The guy who discovered the Big Bang was a fantastic scientist. I mean, he was incredible. He actually had a big tiff with Pope Pius XII. The Pope wanted him to use it as proof of God's existence, and he said no way. And he gave him a good fight, and actually Pius stepped down from it. He deferred to him. I mean, you never know where it's coming. We all don't have it all, I would say. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
We got another one back here first, Tom, and then we'll come up.
Thanks for your presentation this evening. It seemed as if at the beginning you strongly suggested that it's our responsibility to show to believers that their logic is fallacious. However, most of the time when you attempt to do that, they put up such resistance. They get angry, they deflect, they're very evasive, and they just don't show that they understand what we're saying. How do you propose, or what do you would say are some of the best ways to show to these believers that they are using fallacious reasoning?
That's a great question, and I think I have a good answer to it too. And it isn't my answer, but this is generally what's being kicked around now. You're talking not to the other the believer in a debate. You're talking to the people who are sitting on the fence. And those are the people to keep in mind. So you want to be polite. You want to accept and let the person talk and not, make ad hominem remarks about them, but not back down. In other words, David Silverman goes into this at length in his new book. We have the truth, and we are not going to back down about it. We should never be hold back on telling people. Except, you have to use tact also. You must, you're not going to do something stupid and make some direct attack on the person, but you cannot hide the truth. You have to present it. I would say it, and I wouldn't go after the person if they said, no, you're crazy. I would just back off, but I would not say, yes, you're right. I would just keep quiet and maybe just look at them. And if they get really abusive, walk out of the room. Yeah.
I was intrigued that you talked about The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. Yep. I don't think that's getting as much publicity as what I felt it to be an earth-shaking book that it was, and that it yanked morality out from underneath the position of religion. And then he came along and wrote about taking the spiritual feelings out from religion. And he's yanked away everything that religion claims. Finally. Yep. But I don't think he's getting credit for making these changes.
I think you're right. And wherever I talk, I definitely applaud him. His thinking is revolutionary. He really has produced, I would say, a revolution in thinking about values and morality and placing it as a valid scientific subject. And it's really fantastic. I think it's wonderful. Yeah.
So follow on to that. I was wondering why it's not getting as much publicity, as much credit.
Why? I don't know. I have been very, very bad at one thing, predicting how well some of these ideas would be received by the public. I am way off on that. I think I have to defer to Madison Avenue, and I just don't know how to sell some of these to. Although I'm beginning to think that the way we should sell our ideas to young people is by showing them how ugly religion makes people, and to use the attacks of the religious on. If you ever watch any of the debates between atheists and religionists, and just count the number of ad hominem comments the religious make versus the atheists, you'd see it's like 10 to 1, 20 to 1, and they make themselves ugly. And I think if we want to sell secularism and atheism to young people, we have to do it that way. We have to really point it out that religious people get very ugly when they follow their dogma like the crazy nuts that they are. Yeah.
There's a movement of applied rationality. Center for Applied Rationality is a group that Julia Galef, I think is her name, has started an education program and to try to get people to use rationality in their everyday lives, and has there's an interesting concept that I didn't see in your talk, but I'm sure you're aware of, and that's the Bayes theorem and Bayesian analysis of arguments. And I noticed when you did the serial calculation of probabilities, it reminded me of the Bayes theorem. Do you have any comments about how that might be used, if that's too difficult, or or if that's something that might appeal to?
I have to admit that sort of came upon me like way after I was out of graduate school, and I never got up with it. I never used it in my research. I think I used standard statistics. But you're right, it is becoming the procedure of choice, I think. And I think we're all going to have to learn how to use it and how to frame our arguments with it, or at least support our arguments with it. But I'm sure that if we don't know it, the religious are probably 100 years behind us. So it's going to take a while before. Although some of them are very intelligent people, and I got a feeling that maybe we should hurry up and learn it quickly. Yeah. 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 Who? Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. What's your experience been when you discuss this material with somebody that you consider is a good scientist and also happens to be religious?
I don't know that if I know anyone that is like that. I'm sure there are, but I just can't think of anyone at the moment. But I said, I just said, but before, you really have to be polite, but you must say what you say and follow, and say it logically and follow the whole lot, because we have the logic, they don't. They simply have, fairy tales. They have wish fulfillment, and when they get really nasty, yeah, then I can start criticizing their motivation. But if you're talking to a person, you really have to be very nice. Yeah. Anything else?
You had a slide on emergence,
Yes.
and if I understood it correctly, the assumption is that religious people use that as an argument for themselves. But I've spoken to people who are not religious, who I consider to be rational, who also use the emergence. I think one of the more famous arguments is the I is the result of emergence. So I'm not a fan of it myself, but it seems to be used in a non-religious and more scientific way, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, it's been used that way for a long time, but if you actually look at the arguments, it distills into some kind of a spiritual thing, because they don't understand where it comes from, but they say, you see, that means non-science is real. The science doesn't have everything. And I think that that's incorrect, because let's look over a history. Some of the things that were considered emergent phenomena, what are they now? Now, I have to admit, I don't have a good full sample of these. I just know a few of them. Like, in Pasteur's time, it was thought that that life was spontaneously generated from decaying meat, okay? Because they hadn't detected the eggs that the flies laid in them. When they did, voila, all right? There's a very interesting history of reproduction, human reproduction. Before the genetic code was discovered and before Darwin, it was thought that we reproduced from little copies inside us, that every woman had little copies of herself in her ovaries, and each of those copies had little copies and copies, or, an infinite regression. So they said, well, you see, reproduction is a mystery. It's a spiritual thing. It's a non-material something where we don't have no idea what happens. And then we found out about self-replication, and then we found out about the genetic code, and so that whole thing just dissolved and is never brought up again. So it's really good to know some of the history of science, so you understand how these things occurred. And I think the same thing is true of emergent phenomena. Emergent. It gives a name to this, and it creates the impression that science really doesn't have it all, or doesn't even have most of it. That so many of these things are emergent. But if you look at the history of science, they all fade with more work. Yeah.
I have a question. In your talk, you talked about our perception of blueness as being evidence for or against the scientific viewpoint, but it was very trivial to hook up a camera to a computer and program the computer to recognize a blue object. So how is that an argument for or against your proposition?
No, the argument is that we can't understand what the experience of blueness is. In other words, we all know what goes on in our retina. We know the wavelength of light. We know the rods and the cones. We know the pathways up to the visual cortex. We understand all that. What we don't understand is that how can that produce an experience of, and they use blueness as simply as an example. And that's a tough one. That's called the hard part of the mind-body problem. It's always been the hard part. I have a couple of ideas about that, by the way, that, first of all, I don't think that we would be able to experience it if it wasn't real. And I think that we can start to get into that maybe eventually, but it's still a big puzzle. But if we can sense it, to me that means it's real, because we can't sense anything that's not real. Yeah.
Are you presuming that when I see blue, I see the same color that you see when you see blue?
Well, that's the mystery. We'll never be able to know. There's no way of knowing the validity of what you experience and hooking it up and whether I experience anything. Then you can say, well, everything else you do and all of the other behaviors agree with the fact that you would be seeing something like that. But I'm not so sure that would prove that we are experiencing the same sensation. But look, this is a major challenge. We've had major challenges in the past, and we've always come through. And I think it's hard, but I'm confident that we are eventually going to solve it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, in that last comment that you're making about the experiencing the color and all person experience another color or whatnot, I mean, either the sensations can be tricked as well. I mean, if you have people that hallucinate and they will see a blue color, even though there's no blue color on it, how you account for that?
I'm not so sure I mean...
So it's no reality, basically. There's no real color being produced, but the person itself is like, well, I see the color,
Yeah, I don't know what's going on in their brains. I mean, their visual cortex might be activated, or some association might be activated, some association area to activate the neurons that actually see real blue so that they see false blue, or they are activated in the absence of blue. I don't really know, but I don't think it's a contradiction of the...
Actually, the external phenomena to experience the color.
I'm sorry, you don't need the stimuli to experience. No, this experience is within you. It's your response to the stimulus. You can probably mimic that response. You can bypass the original stimulus by going right to the receptive cells and somehow, faking them out that they're getting, real blue.
Okay. One more issue that I have is in the anthropic principle that you mentioned. I thought that anthropic principle was based on all the creation, God does everything because humankind is the top of the creation, and everything is tuned up so that humankind can live in Earth and whatnot. So, and science has been debunking this over and over and over. Do you think that something like finding life on another planet will be like a big hit to religion?
Well, you may be right. Yes, about that. If we were, about the world being the center of creation and all that. Yes, that would be a major challenge to them. Not to us, though. I mean, it would be, one problem that keeps coming up is that why isn't there life all over the universe? There was the famous Fermi's paradox. Enrico Fermi said, why haven't they visited us yet? If they're, it's been how many billions of years and no one's come yet? And so he threw that out as an argument. I don't know what he was arguing against, but he said, this is something that you guys cannot explain. And I think that was a tough one, but I think he had the wrong time frame. In other words, the universe is 13 billion years old. We're 4 billion years into planet Earth. Who knows what's going to happen? And it may take, if we survive, we might actually populate the entire galaxy, but it might take another billion years. I can see that happening because the way science is making leaps and bounds, and exponential growth in the last 100 years. If that continues for 1,000,000 years, there's no stopping us. I don't know where we're going to go, but I mean, I can see us populating the entire universe. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we have a few more minutes, so maybe one or two more questions. So.
Thanks. I arrived late, and I'm not a real scientifically educated person. And this might be a little off topic from what was a pretty, seemed like pretty fact-based, science-based presentation. But my question is kind of political. The religious entities in the world seem to have a somewhat common political orientation of conservatism and sort of right-wing politics. Does atheism have a natural political expression that it would seem like, we should have in common with each other? Or can any atheist just, rationally express themselves in any political form, ranging from fascism to communism to liberalism or anything else?
Well, that's a great question, and that consumes most of our discussions all the time, I would say. I'm not sure that I have an answer for it. Except that I assume that most rational people I speak with, accept the rationality of human values and that not causing pain to our fellow creatures. There is, the only scientific studies of those are by this guy named Haidt. I don't know if you know him. He has 5 dimensions of morality. I think I'm not sure what they all are. One is harm, harm avoidance, loyalty, purity, and there are 2 more. I forgot what. And he studied liberals versus conservatives, and it turns out that liberals like to support harm avoidance, whereas conservatives support all 5. Strangely enough, I would never have thought that. But at any rate, he's the only guy who's actually looked at the different morality, in terms of different political views. In terms of atheism, this is a tough one. Almost every atheist I know is the rational ones, that is, are pretty liberal, and the Democrats. It's very rare that we see a Republican who's an atheist. So that would support, that there is a correspondence there. Could it be derived? I think some people could try to do that, would like to try to do that. Yeah, I think I could see that, you're going to have to make a lot of leaps between politics and the assumptions and the assumptions of science and the assumptions of values and humanity, but I think it might be doable. Yeah. So we would end up, keeping all the Republicans, kicking them out of our groups. That, of course, is wrong, right? And that we could never do that. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have one last question here.
Well, I'd like to comment on that last question. There's actually only one characteristic that defines an atheist, and that is lack of a belief in a God. So there's not necessarily a political affiliation that an atheist would or wouldn't have, but I think you explained it really well, that atheists do have tendencies to be on a certain side with respect to things like political position and other values. So I appreciate your presentation.
Well, thanks, but I have to ask you a difficult question, though. And that is, would you consider a person an atheist if they supported the existence of flying saucers, reincarnation, and they disbelieved in God, and disputed the efficacy of vaccines, and had a whole set of beliefs like that? Would you consider them an atheist?
If they don't believe in a God or a gods, or gods, I should say, then they would be an atheist.
See, I think that the definition is changing with usage. I think that in the current times, the word atheism is becoming almost synonymous with rationalism. I can't see how anybody could be a very committed atheist without being rational. I may be wrong about that, but and I can tell you, I really can't get along too well with people that are so irrational that they're going to reject all, I mean, how can you talk to people like that? What? No one's in, yeah, well, okay, but I think it's a very important point. It's important that we discuss it, and bring it up, but thanks for the comment.
So just to add to that, and this might be getting into a game of semantics, would you say a newborn baby is an atheist?
Yeah, I guess that, I don't know. That's a good question. I have to think about it. I don't have an answer. A lot of people do feel that they are. I mean, they call them, you were born atheist, but I don't know if I agree with it. Okay.
All right, I think that's going to do it. Yeah, thanks.